Was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap either in planning or communication.
The recent House congressional hearing subpoenaed the U.S. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle about the attempted assassination of former President Trump. The hearing aimed to evaluate the Secret Service's response, security measures, and protocols in light of the assassination attempt. Representative Jared Moskowitz confronted Cheadle regarding the agency's failures and the need for accountability, questioning whether Cheadle was prepared to fire individuals responsible for the security lapses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. I want to thank the subpoena that you sent. I want to thank Ranking Member Raskin and your work, the letter you sent to the committee. And I also support the creation of a commission to get to the bottom of what happened. Director, I just want to give you an honest assessment of how this is going for you today. Did you happen to catch the hearing many months ago in education where there were a bunch of university presidents and Elise Stefanik asked a very easy question and couldn't get an answer? Did you see that hearing?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay, well, let me tell you, it didn't go well, and the short end of that story was those university professors all resigned. They're gone. That's how this is going for you. This is where this is headed, okay? This is, I don't know who prepared you for this. I don't know how many times you've testified in front of Congress, but a president was almost assassinated live on television, not just for Americans, but for the world to see. And this being your first opportunity, I understand there's an ongoing investigation. I understand there's things that you can not talk about. But the idea that we're getting less than you did on television is something that Democrats, Independents, or Republicans are going to find unacceptable. My high school, Marjorie Taylor Greene, was on the list of mass shootings that Representative Raskin held up. That very day, the school resource officer, a police officer, did not run into the building. He hid in the stairwell while the shooter was in the building. He stayed outside, never helped, okay? He also directed other officers who showed up on the scene not to go into the building. When it was determined that the failures in response and training, and that the sheriff fired nobody in his agency, Governor DeSantis then removed that sheriff. I supported the removal. So here's my question. You said there's going to be accountability. I understand you don't want to give us names. When you say that, are you telling the committee that once it's concluded, you're prepared to fire the people on the ground who made poor decisions that day?
I'm prepared to take the actions necessary.
No, that's nonsense. Okay? Accountability. The failure was human. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It means they failed that day, and a former president was almost assassinated. Okay? Are you prepared to fire the human failure on the ground? Yes or no? When you have the names of where those failures were, they're people. It's not like a piece of technology failed. It was people who failed that day. Are you prepared to fire them?
I don't have an answer as to whether.
Well, then how can there be accountability if you're not prepared to fire someone? And the reason why your name is going to be the person who's held accountable, the reason why members in this committee are calling for resignation, and I join in that, or for the president to fire you, is because you're saying there's going to be accountability, but you can't commit that people are going to get fired. Let me ask this question a different way. If Trump had been assassinated that day, if the gunman had succeeded, okay, would you have come and tendered your resignation?
I would still be sitting here because I would want to ensure the integrity of the investigation.
Totally understand. That's a fair answer, that you would have set up that process. But would you have had the honor to come in front of the committee and say, former president was assassinated on my watch, there should be new leadership?
I think that I have admitted that there was
No, that's what I'm asking. Would you have tendered your resignation if he had been killed?
That occurred on my watch, and I am accountable for that.
Okay, but would you have tendered your resignation if he had been killed?
I think that I've admitted that I've taken accountability and will take responsibility.
Okay. Well, let me I want to follow up on Representative Connolly's question, in which he asked about guns, and you were not willing to commit that makes your job harder. This is not about the Second Amendment. If there were over 400 million guns on the streets, if all of those guns were machine guns, would that make your job harder to protect people?
Again, I think weapons that are out there.
If all of those guns were rocket-propelled grenades, would that make your job harder?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Perfect. This is not a trick question. Thank you. Okay. I won't ask the other 15 things I was going to do. I was going to do drone strikes, but it's okay. So that's all we were asking. It creates a challenging environment. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment or people's rights, but it does make your job harder. So credit to Representative Connolly for asking that question. One last thing, Mr. Chairman, and I'll conclude. You know, there was a question asked, is an Iranian assassin more capable than a 20-year-old? And I have been tough on Iran. I probably have more resolutions on Iran than almost anyone in Congress. But I can tell you it isn't Iranians walking into schools and grocery stores and movie theaters and churches. It is 20-year-olds, right? And some of them are mentally unstable. And they have access to guns. And they're domestic terrorists. Someone talked about Christopher Wray. Christopher Wray has talked about domestic terrorism. And so, yes, we collectively come together on foreign threats, and I am not at all debasing the fact that there are foreign threats here and abroad, but there are domestic threats, and we have to get to the bottom of how we stop domestic terrorism, because it was a 20-year-old who walked into my high school and killed 17 people. He was plenty capable, and he was an Iranian. Thank you.
Representative Tim Burchett criticized Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, calling her a DEI horror story. He argued that her leadership had failed to protect the American people and suggested she should be fired.
Ms. Cheadle, the shooter was set up on the roof of the AGR International building, as we know. Was the roof identified as a potential vulnerability days before the rally?
To my knowledge, yes, it was.
Were agents or officers inside the building? If so, what floor were they on?
We had local police officers inside the building.
The roof looks like it's a tin roof. How did no one inside that building hear someone moving on top of a metal roof?
I don't have the details of all of the interviews that have been conducted yet.
When will you have those?
I have been asking, and I want to have that information as soon as you do as
Okay.
well.
Why did Secret Service fail to block the line of sight from that roof?
I think that the Secret Service put together a plan where they were counting that roof in as part of their overwatch, and that was the plan that they had put in place that day.
If you weren't going to put a security personnel on the roof, why not at least use drone technology or aerial surveillance to monitor the rally?
There are a number of times that we do use drone technology. I'm not speaking specifically to this event and what was utilized or not. There are times when drone technology is available and helpful at events, and there are times when it is not appropriate.
Do y'all use Signal? Do you personally use Signal to communicate with any official from the White House? Signal on your phone?
Oh, on occasion, I'm sure that there are people that use Signal, yes.
Okay. Do you use it to speak with the White House? Use Signal?
No, I do not.
Okay. When was Thomas Crooks first identified as a person of interest? Let me help you. At 5:10, he was spotted with a rangefinder at 5:51. And when did Secret Service notice him?
Again, I don't have those specific timelines, but it was a relatively short period of time.
Let me help you. 5:52. Ms. Cheadle, why was President Trump allowed on stage 10 minutes after the Secret Service spotted a suspicious individual? That seems to me to be the worst thing of all. All the breakdown and all this communication, all the BS you've been feeding us here today or not feeding us, that seems to be the question.
So as I've stated before, there are a number of events where suspicious people may be identified. That doesn't necessarily...
Ma'am, I submit to you, you got a guy who's going to be the next president of the United States. He's on stage. I've been to these events. We've all been to these events. A car backfires, and there's a 15-minute dadgum wait. That's not acceptable. Did the Secret Service tell President Trump they'd spotted a suspicious individual before he was shot?
I am unclear as to what the communication was with the former president at that time.
I'll take that as a no. Did y'all deny President Trump's request for more security, yes or no? And when was the most recent request for additional security?
The rally request for security, all of those requests were fulfilled.
And were there any personnel redirected to Jill Biden's rally?
No.
Who made the decision on the direction of agents at either one of those rallies?
I'm unclear as to your question on the direction of the agents.
I said, who directed those agents to be at Ms. Biden's rally or President Trump's rally? The specific agents.
So there is a methodology in which agents are available for assignments, and they are assigned based on either geographic location or logistics or flight.
Ma'am, I appreciate all that, but that methodology about got President Trump killed. Was the security detail guarding President Trump a temporary detail?
The personnel who are assigned to the former president's detail are assigned to him.
Why was there a different detail on the opening night of the convention than the detail that was guarding him in Pennsylvania?
The president has a very large permanent protective detail assigned to him. They work shift work, and so it could be that people you saw at the rally were not working the same shift the day that he was.
I can assure you, ma'am, somebody that's a lot shorter than the president was not at the convention, and the people that were cowering down behind the mass of agents that were on top of the president were not in the convention hall. At least I didn't see them. You can't seem to answer a single question about an ongoing investigation, ma'am, and you don't know when the information will be released publicly. Are you waiting for the administration to sign off?
No, I am waiting for the results of the investigation, at which time.
Okay. Let me ask you one more question. You found explosives in the shooter's possession. Is that correct?
The FBI found explosives.
Do we know who directed this young man how to make those explosives?
I believe that the FBI is still looking into that on their investigation.
Ms. Cheadle, you said that the buck stops with me, and I agree. I don't think you should resign. I think you should have been fired. Ma'am, you are a DEI horror story. I've told my daughter multiple times, my wife and my daughter, we talk to her all the time about how she's going to succeed in life. She'll succeed in life by achieving. Ma'am, you have not achieved today. You've let the American public down. If it was up to me, you'd be gone.
Representative Jasmine Crockett addressed the comments made by Tim Burchett regarding the Secret Service's failures and his emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion policies.
Let me just pick up where my colleague from Tennessee left off. Director Cheadle, was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap either in planning or communication.
Thank you so much. In fact, I have a few articles that I will enter into the record once I wrap up that actually acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service, whether it's been in various levels of law enforcement. But, you know, I want to stick here for just a second, because earlier you had a conversation in which there was a discussion about training. And I want to talk about training, and I want to talk about the fact that there's been a little bit of dancing around as it relates to this being a suspicious person and this being a situation that was perceived to be a threat. And it seems as if there's a different analysis that takes place. One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training that your officers undergo. And the reason that I ask that, because as a civil rights lawyer, I have learned so many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun. Yet a lot of times, at least in this country, when it comes to law enforcement, there is a perceived threat just by somebody having a little bit more melanin in their skin. So I'm curious to know, because a lot of times, one of the things that we have consistently pushed for on my side of things, and when I say my side, is once we are looking at a tragedy in which law enforcement made an error, is the bias training and whether or not our officers are getting it. So I'm curious to know, in some of the training that you talk about that is part of your budget, has bias training been part of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. I know that today is a rough day, and on that day in Pennsylvania, it was a rough day. And the reality is that I understand it, and you may or may not know the answer to this question, in the space in which this event took place, it was an open carry space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I hail from the state of Texas, and interestingly enough, I was serving in the state house right after there was a mass shooting in El Paso. We had an opportunity to do right by our citizens in Texas, but we did not. Instead, they passed permitless carry. And what my colleagues kept trying to get you to answer, because we want to come up with solutions, we don't want to keep pointing the finger. And right now, you've got a bunch of fingers that are pointed at you. But our job is to solve problems for the American people. And to be perfectly honest, the numbers are clear. I think almost every major law enforcement agency come forward and say that they were against permitless carry because they said that their jobs would be made more difficult. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the state of Texas decided that they would ignore those warnings, and they passed the law instead. And right after they passed that law, we ended up with Uvalde. And we heard the stories of those officers that were scared to go in and save those babies because of the firearm in which in that case, 18-year-old had in his hands. They also were given an opportunity to say, hey, raise the age and make it to where at least you have to be 21 before you can possess this type of weapon. And they chose not to. And we have the facts. It shows, and I'll enter this into the record as well if there is no objection, deaths from firearms keep climbing in Texas decades after lawmakers began weakening gun regulations. That is from the Texas Tribune.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. The last thing that I'm just going to make a point of saying is that we all care about this issue because we know that there has been a spike in violence, political violence in this country. Are you aware of the fact that the numbers are higher right now?
Yes.
Okay. In addition to that, and I'm going to point a little blame at ourselves because right now you got all the fingers pointed at you. But the reality is that we have a number of congressional members that are consistently engaging in violent rhetoric, and it needs to be toned down. The reality is that people are listening and they're paying attention, but unfortunately, another thing that is happening because we're not getting answers from you today is the conspiracy theories. They have already began. Have you heard of any of the conspiracies?
Yes.
Okay. The problem with these conspiracies is that when people believe that, say, the president of the United States ordered a hit, or they believe it was an inside job, or whatever conspiracies they believe because they don't have any facts in front of them, that potentially incites the next level of violence at the next event in retaliation for this. So we are only begging for your job as it relates to being the director, as well as the men and women that you are protecting as their director, that you keep them safe by making sure that the American people have the information that they need so that they can feel as if Secret Service is on the side of the American people. And ma'am, I don't doubt that Secret Service is on the side of the American people. But right now, so long as these conspiracy theories continue to fester, it is going to make your job that much harder. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene sharply criticized Kimberly Cheadle for the agency's failures and labeled the incident an absolute security failure and demanded Cheadle's resignation.
Ms. Cheadle, I'd like to remind you that you're under oath. The site team has a senior supervisor, an advanced team, a protective intelligence team, a counter sniper element, and detail. Who was the agent in charge? How long has she been the agent in charge? And what is her Secret Service background?
So I'm not going to provide a name.
Why not? You're here to answer our
This
questions.
forum, I'm not going to provide names of.
You stated in your testimony, you said, I am here today to answer your questions.
That is correct.
Answer the question.
I'm not going to provide names of our personnel. To
Why
this
not?
committee today.
The American people are demanding these answers from you today, Ms. Cheadle.
I will do the best to provide you accurate information based on the facts that I have at this time.
You're not answering our questions. The advance element coordinates with other intel or law enforcement partners, identifies threats and weaknesses at the sites and movements. We'd like a copy of the advance report. Have you brought it here with you today?
We will comply with the request for the documentation that has been requested.
When will that be, Ms. Cheadle? Because you should have brought it today.
I am certain that our personnel are working on obtaining all of that documentation.
I don't believe you, and neither do the people watching this hearing. You're not doing well, as Mr. Moskowitz informed you. You've been sitting here for over 3 hours, and I have you know the entire country is demanding you resign and demanding that you be fired if you do not resign. Things are not going well for you. You need to answer the questions. Was there a protective intelligence team, and what technical resources were utilized for that event, specifically drone or helicopter assets?
There were a number of technical assets that were deployed for that event, and there was a protective intelligence team that was assigned to that event.
Why was Crooks able to fly a drone over the entire area the day of the rally and the day of his assassination attempt?
To my knowledge, he did not fly the drone over the entire area.
How did he fly a drone over the area, period? Any part of the area?
Again, I would have to go back and check the timeline of when that took place and when the event...
Why didn't you bring the timeline with you today to answer our questions?
I don't have all of the answers on the timelines based on the criminal investigation.
Were you not prepared today to answer our questions?
I am prepared to answer the questions based on the information and wanted to be able to provide.
Do you have a timeline do you have a timeline at all from any of the day?
I have a timeline that does not have specifics.
That's shocking. That is absolutely unacceptable. That means you are a failure at your job. Let's talk about things that are prohibited in Trump rallies. And I've been to a lot of Trump rallies. Backpacks and bags, bicycles, firearms, any type of weapon, or any other item determined to be a potential safety hazard, like a rangefinder would be one. At 5:10, Crooks is first observed by one of the snipers, AGR Sniper 1, at the building. 5:10, President Trump was shot in the face at 6:11 p.m. 5:28, AGR Sniper 1 takes a picture of a bicycle and 2 bags. Those belong to Crooks. 5:32, AGR Sniper 1 spots Crooks looking at his phone and using a rangefinder. 5:55, Butler ESU Command confirms receipt of photos and states they have been relayed on. 6:05 p.m., AGR Sniper 1 later communicates that Crooks is seen moving northeast in direction of Sheetz and that Crooks has a backpack. 2 minutes before the shooting, while President Trump has been allowed to take the stage, people see Crooks laying on his stomach in a sniper position on the roof, and they're yelling he has a gun, and they are trying to alert law enforcement and Secret Service. Why was Crooks not shot by the snipers? Why was he allowed to be there?
As soon as the individual was identified as a threat, they were...
No. What do you consider to be a threat? A man with a gun laying in a sniper position, a man that had a backpack, a man that had a bicycle, a man that had a rangefinder. At what point is he determined a threat?
An individual with a backpack is not a threat. An individual with a rangefinder is not a threat.
What about a man laying on a building that has direct line of sight of President Trump with a gun that people are screaming and pointing out? Is that a threat, Ms. Cheadle?
Once that individual was identified, they were neutralized.
No, they were neutralized. Crooks was neutralized after he shot President Trump in the face, Ms. Cheadle. Is he only a threat once he fires the weapon?
As soon as the counter sniper identified that individual, they were able to neutralize them.
How were people in the crowd? Okay, then let's just take it this way. People under your command did not consider him to be a threat, yet people in the crowd knew he had a gun and considered him to be a threat. That means that you are a complete failure as the director of the Secret Service, that people under your command don't perceive a man laying on a roof with direct line to the president with a gun. They don't perceive that to be a threat, yet the people in the crowd do. How is that possible?
That's the last question, but please answer the question, Ms. Director.
I'm not certain at this time how the information from the people in the crowd was relayed to any law enforcement personnel.
No, you knew, that everyone knew. The people there knew that there was a danger, they knew there was a threat to President Trump, and it was allowed to happen. Was there a stand-down order, Ms. Cheadle? Was there a conspiracy to kill President Trump?
Absolutely not.
Then how did this happen? And why are you still sitting here not turning in your letter of resignation?
Last question, but please answer, and then I'll recognize Ms. Pressley. Please answer the question.
That is what we are investigating to determine.
We're waiting for your letter. We are waiting for your letter of resignation, and you really need to consider doing that before you leave today.
Representative Ayanna Pressley stressed that focusing on DEI distracts from the real issues at hand and called for concrete actions to prevent such security breaches in the future. Here's what she had to say.
Absolutely no one should fear for their life. At a political rally, in a classroom, in a faith house, or in their home. We must do something about political violence in all its forms and gun violence in all of its forms. Now, Director Cheadle, you have noted that numerous investigations are ongoing related to the Secret Service response and that we can expect a report in the next 60 days. With the election nearly 100 days away, that is an unacceptable timeline, and it makes people less safe. It also allows my colleagues across the aisle, Republicans, additional time to spread dangerous misinformation, which also puts people in harm's way. Some Republicans have exploited this moment to continue to attack progress towards racial justice and gender equity in America. Disappointing, but not surprising. I hesitate to repeat their racist and sexist tropes, but in summary, Republicans have wrongfully and shamefully stated that hiring women and people of color hindered the response to the shooting. Now, this is part and parcel of Republican strategy to constantly attack necessary diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, to undermine the contributions that women, people of color, the disability community, and others make to this country each and every day. And it is disgraceful. In the wake of gun violence and tragic loss of life, Republicans are ignoring solutions like gun safety reform and instead trotting out sexist tropes. Can't say I'm surprised. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record reporting from CNN titled "Right-Wing Media Figures Blame Women in Secret Service and DEI for Security Failure in Trump Shooting."
Without objection to order.
This article quotes members of Congress and others that plainly accuse DEI and the hiring of women as a liability for the Secret Service. Women have been an integral part of the agency since 1971 and are held to the same standards as their male counterparts. To use them as a scapegoat during a time of crisis is shameful and it is dangerously divisive. In fact, based on recent publicly available demographic data of the agency, the largest demographic groups among special agents are white and male. But to right-wing extremists, the truth doesn't matter. The lies they tell to advance their anti-diversity agenda, which is a key theme throughout Project 2025, will only make the American public less safe and more divided. And every day, Director Cheadle, that you fail to give us answers, they are given more oxygen to make their baseless claims that women and people of color are responsible for tragic events. And that is dangerous too. Thank you. And I yield my remaining time to Ranking Member Raskin.
Thank you to the distinguished gentlelady from Massachusetts, and thank you for those trenchant insights. I wanted to make the point that you were making and several of other members were making to bring it into sharp relief here. The very same day that Donald Trump narrowly escaped an assassination attempt, but an honored firefighter was gunned down and killed and other people were injured. There was another mass shooting that day, just several hours later in Birmingham, Alabama. 4 people killed and 10 wounded in a nightclub shooting. And you might think, oh, that's some kind of freakish coincidence. Not at all. We have more than one mass shooting a day in America. They are so commonplace now that they are barely reported in the national news. It's, of course, local news in Birmingham, Alabama, that 4 people were killed and 10 other people were shot and seriously wounded, being treated at the hospital. These things are a nightmare for the families of the victims who've been killed, for the families who have to take care of people who've been seriously injured and wounded. They are a major financial drain, publicly and privately, and yet we allow AR-15s to be purchased with abandon, promiscuously, all over the country. People can just go out and get an assault weapon. And the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan was right. We have a hearing when it affects the President of the United States, but on all the other days of the year, we don't have a hearing about it. And I think it is because of an honest disagreement we have about the Second Amendment. There are some people who think the Second Amendment means you've got the right to arm yourself with whatever weaponry you need to overthrow the government of the United States, and we reject that as a false interpretation of the Second Amendment and a false interpretation of the Constitution. We can ban assault weapons. We did it back in 1994. It dramatically reduced these mass shootings, and when that ban was lifted, the mass shootings went up through the roof again, and we've shown it. And so just like we're demanding real answers and real action from the Secret Service, let us demand real action and real answers from ourselves about the nightmare of mass gun violence, which puts America into a category all its own when you compare us to the countries in the European Union or Canada or other similarly situated countries. There's nothing like what we're going through. So we've got to act on the Secret Service to protect ourselves against political violence, and we've got to act as a Congress to protect ourselves against AR-15 violence in America.